This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Now we look at the classifications of business process change, and we'll also look at how we might be able to identify where some changes might be possible and useful. The first classification is shown here, where we have automation, we have rationalization, and we've got business process re-engineering. And as you go through those three, they are in increasing levels of seriousness or levels of innovation. Automation is simply doing by machine what used to be done manually, and this was really the first applications of computers, where instead of working out maybe thousands of people's wages and salaries by hand, it was automated. Another early victory for automation was in receivables ledgers and production of invoices. It will increase speed, it will increase accuracy, it will probably decrease the cost of this type of processing. It's worthwhile, but it's not particularly radical. It is doing the same in an automatic fashion. Again, one of the early types of automation was in supermarkets, whereas you go to the checkout and what you're buying is scanned there, then automatically the inventory would be reduced every time an item was bought, and again automatically the system could print out and fire off an order to replenish stock. And that is perfectly useful, but nevertheless there are still certain problems with it, because your orders for stock would arrive at the suppliers, and the suppliers would be potentially kind of surprised. They wouldn't be expecting perhaps an order for particular types of inventory and so on, and these orders would be arriving out of the blue, and maybe the suppliers had to produce the goods. They would certainly have to load the goods onto trucks and dispatch them. So there's a bit of inefficiency there. And what rationalization, the next one, tries to do is to remove bottlenecks, to think a little bit more about the system, and rather than just automating what was there, thinking, can we do it any better? And the way that was tackled in supermarkets was that instead of the supermarket keeping an eye on its inventory, what if the supermarket gave suppliers access to their inventory? So the supplier, through an intranet, could watch the inventory that they supply in a supermarket decreasing, and they could anticipate when replenishment was needed. So they don't have to wait for the order to come in. They can be geared up, ready to dispatch the goods. Really, as soon as the goods reach the order level, new stuff will arrive. It also spreads the risk a little bit. You have maybe 100 suppliers keeping an eye on their stock, rather than putting the whole burden on the supermarket to keep an eye on the stock. And this can greatly speed up and make much more efficient the inventory management. It also allows the supermarket to survive with less average inventory. It has to keep less buffer stock, really, in case the orders don't come in on time. And then finally we have business process re-engineering. This is a very radical, fundamental change in what's taking place. And the classic case, which is frequently mentioned in business process re-engineering, happened at Ford Motor Company in America. And this was kind of many years ago, when things were essentially done pretty manually. And Ford Motor Company, the big manufacturing plant in Detroit, had a huge, what they call accounts payable. This was dealing with basically the payment of suppliers. And you can imagine how many invoices and orders and goods received notes were being received on a daily basis on a huge manufacturing plant. And Ford had a traditional system which employed about 400 people. And what happened was the goods would come in, goods received note would be raised, and then it would go to accounts payable. The goods received note would be matched to an order to make sure they'd actually ordered the goods, and then that would kind of sit in a file awaiting an invoice coming. When an invoice came, you had to then match the invoice to the goods received note order pair, make sure it was all in order, make sure the prices were correct and so on. You then credit that to the payables ledger, and then you would wait your 30 days, whatever it was, and you would pay the suppliers. And Ford had a very radical idea. It said to its suppliers, don't send invoices. It says we know what we've ordered, we know when we have received them, we also know what prices we agreed when we ordered the goods, and 30 days or whatever the time period was after we receive the goods, we'll pay you. But we don't need an invoice. We don't need our people to be matching invoices to this other documentation. We don't need our people to be checking the prices you put on the invoice and the addition of the invoices and the like. And that is obviously a very radical change to do without invoices. It won't work everywhere because we need documentation for tax and so on. But it worked there, and it reduced their accounts payable staff from about 400 down to about 40, because they simply avoided all this kind of paper shuffling and paper matching that was really achieving very little added value. Just in time, some people think just in time is rationalization, some people think it's more business process re-engineering. I mention that simply to say that there's no hard and fast boundary between what you might consider rationalization, what you might consider business process re-engineering. It's much more of a continuum of increasing changes and more fundamental changes. How can we get to a business process redesign? What is a methodology for that, or indeed any kind of change, I suppose, really. But obviously it gets more important to get it right. The more radical the change is, it's going to be harder to reverse. And first of all, it's important to plan the project. We're going to be looking very soon at project management, and planning is very important, and in particular scope. Exactly what are we trying to accomplish? Exactly what are the deliverables, the aims of this project? And we have to kind of freeze that down, define that. Otherwise you get what's called project drift. And little bits are added on and so on. And before you know where you are, the whole thing becomes a mess. There'll be schedules for time, there'll be budgets for costs and the like. And then what you will tend to do, and this is very common in any sort of systems design methodology, you document and understand and analyze the existing process. It's fair to say that the really important stuff is already being carried on, and whatever we do, we want to make sure the really important stuff continues to be accomplished, maybe in a different way, but we might add all other stuff to it to make it more complex, but certainly the basics still have to be there, and we have to understand what the basics are and to make sure they're still going to be accommodated. We redesign the process and may go through several iterations of the redesign stage. And then there is the development of the resources for the improved process. It could be the writing of software, it could be training people, it could be putting up a new factory, it could be installing robots or something in a warehouse. So we have to develop these resources, whether they're physical resources or software resources, to accomplish the change. It could be training, it could be recruiting people. Then finally there is the transition phase. We have to bring the new process online, and essentially we have to test that it works. We don't want to throw out the old process before making sure the new one's okay. We want to train people on it, ideally before it goes live. We have to make sure it becomes in a way second nature, that people maybe don't slip back into old ways. And very importantly, we have to maintain it. it's unlikely that we're going to have a perfect new system the first time round, and so we need another go at it. It's also unlikely that the new design system is going to last for 10 years, 20 years. So there's probably an ongoing cause for maintenance and changes and updating of that system. How can we perhaps discover what needs to be done? And these approaches give us some clue. First of all, there is zero-based re-engineering. And that's really saying, knowing what I'm doing now, knowing the scale of my operations, if I had my time over again, how would I organise the business? So it might have been that we started our business in the centre of a city, but now the business has grown. Now we're having to get large lorries into the centre of the city to get to the warehouse. The city has anyway got busier and the access is more difficult and so on. And you might say, knowing the scale I'm operating in now, I wouldn't put my business in the city. I would put it outside the city, very close to major motorway connections, lots of access for large lorries and so on. And that's really what I'm going to be aiming at. And this is really this zero base is almost a seeking perfection, starting from a clean slate, building stuff up to the most perfect sort of system you can have is zero-based. It's obviously very radical. It's obviously probably going to be expensive, and there's obviously certain risks entailed in it. But some businesses do take the decision to simply move lock, stock and barrel, say from London to halfway up the country, to be nearer many of their customers and have better access and cheaper premises. Simplification, eliminating duplication and redundant steps. Look at everything we do. Look at every movement of inventory. Look at every movement of documents, every movement of information. I think, do we really need to do that? I think I said before that every time something moves in an organization, really two people are involved, the sender and the receiver. And they have to prepare the documents or the inventory to be sent, and you have to kind of count it and check it when it comes in. If you can cut down the amount of inventory movements, that's great. If you can cut down duplication, perhaps on checking that something has been authorized, the second authorization is not going to accomplish very much. Value-added analysis. Critically look at what you're doing and question really, why am I doing that? Is there any need to have maybe telephone support? You may be employing 3 people in telephone support and they get 1 call a day. First of all, you could maybe cut down the number of people, but if only 1 customer per day is phoning telephone support, it's a bit of a kind of expensive luxury. Maybe we could accomplish this better by having some sort of online help available to people. And finally, gaps and disconnects. Check flows between departments. Be very wary of the potential of information going missing or products getting kind of temporarily mislaid and so on as they go through a factory. Again, this is really a product of moving stuff between departments. If you don't need to move it between departments, or you can maybe combine a department, the chance of information or physical material getting lost is so much less. Now, processes can often be depicted on a swim lane diagram. You won't have to draw one of these. We're a little unsure at the moment whether or not you'd actually be presented by one in the exam, but they're not difficult. It simply puts each department into like a swim lane, and it follows the passage of documents or material through the company as it moves from one department to another. So here it is saying we get an order from a customer. This is going to be addressed to the sales department. What then happens is the sales department sends this order to the warehouse, who make up a box with the goods in it. And then it all goes to the accounts department, whether that's the box or whether it's just the order, whether it's both, we're not sure. And the accounts department does a credit check on it. And then it goes back to sales, where they're going to be presumably verifying the goods against a copy of the order to make sure the same goods are being dispatched that are ordered. And then it goes to the warehouse to be actually dispatched. And then the warehouse tells the accounts department, we've dispatched the goods, now's the time to invoice. And what we're looking for in here are really things which happen, I suppose, is the kind of way of looking at it, not great methodology in looking at it, but you're looking for events which happen in a silly order. And you're looking at movements really across the swim lanes, which are maybe redundant, because we've said every time you shift from one department to another, you're causing work. And here the first inconsistency really we see is that goods are put into their box, the dispatch is made up, and then we have, as an afterthought, almost doing the credit check, which means if they fail a credit check, presumably you have to take the stuff out of the box and put it back onto the shelf. So that's a bit silly, really. So if I can try to amend this a little bit, what should perhaps happen? We don't have that in there. But the order comes from the customer, and immediately there'll be some sort of credit check. And if the credit check is passed, then we can send the kind of approved order, whatever the documentation is, back to the dispatch department, who can make up the dispatch, the box. It doesn't entirely seem clear to me why we have to move everything then to the sales department. I mean, if this is moving stuff physically to the sales department, this is extremely eccentric. There's no reason really why the goods could not be verified in here, so have a good GV in there. And we eliminate the movement out to the sales department and back from the sales department. We're just going to go like that. There's maybe a little conflict here between efficiency, which is what we're looking for in this, and segregation of duties. But there's no reason why within the warehouse one person couldn't be making up the parcel of goods, and an entirely second person couldn't be verifying that the goods are being dispatched correctly. You can still get segregation of duties. So it stays within what's going to be far faster. There could be no delays going from here to here to here, as it would be going like that. And then when the goods are dispatched, presumably out to the customer, then we can signal to the accounts department that an invoice can be raised. So it's really looking on, and there's not much more than a common sense basis here, but look for illogical stuff and look for a lot of kind of changes between departments. If you could eliminate those, you could greatly streamline the process. Finally, another classification of change that you really need to know about. And this looks at the scope of change and the nature of change. The scope of change really is, you can think of it as, is it just one department being altered, or perhaps is it a whole company being altered? You can look at it as, are we fundamentally changing the way we do business? So moving from physical shops to simply trading on the internet would be a very large change. So this out here is high scope. This is very low restricted. So on the left hand side we've got relatively minor changes. On the right hand side we've got very major, very fundamental changes. And then down the left-hand side here we have the nature of change, which is primarily to do with the timing. And basically, incremental means we're doing a little bit at a time, whereas big bang means we're doing everything at once. So we have these two, basically this is kind of slow, this is immediate. And there are four names which you need to know in here, and it can be helpful, I think, for the top two to think in terms of biological terminology, that zoologists talk in terms of animals adapting to their environment, which tends to mean a relatively minor change, perhaps to their feeding habits or the colour of their plumage or something of that sort. And biologists also talk about evolutionary change, from which biologists would claim entirely different species are going to emerge, but over time. So both of these, you think of biology, are fairly slow. Adaptation takes a long time, evolution takes a long time, but adaptation is changes on the periphery, so to speak. Evolution is a very fundamental change. And we're using that just to remember the names. There's no real problem here with revolution. Revolution, we know what a physical or political revolution is. It tends to mean that the whole government changes very quickly, instantly, within a few days, and there's going to be a very fundamental change to the direction of the company or the type of government. So that's revolutionary change. The one that I don't really have a particular way of remembering is reconstruction. Reconstruction is going to happen quickly, but it is more limited. It might be, you can think of it if you like, maybe one of your factories has a fire. It's only affecting that factory, not the rest of the business, and we have to fix it up pretty quickly. So we have to reconstruct our production capacity. What's the point in this? Well, basically, it's, I think, looking at risk. And I think what we can say here is if you're dealing with incremental change here, there's relatively low risk. It's relatively low risk because you're going slowly. You have time to see how the changes you've put through already are behaving. Because you've not changed everything at once, it may be possible to reverse a change which has not been successful. Obviously, evolution, there's ultimately going to be a slightly higher risk than there's going to be in adaptation. Evolution, you're changing the whole business, but slowly. With adaptation, you're changing maybe just one department, but slowly. But the gradual, slow, fairly relaxed nature of the speed of the change means we have nearly always got a fallback position. Down here, the Big Bang, this is going to be much higher risk. Again, we can see that revolution, the risk is potentially immense. At a stroke, you're changing the whole basis of the business. Everyone's job is going to be affected. Think what that might be doing to your suppliers, your customers, your staff, getting the machinery to work, etc. There's so much can go wrong in this Big Bang approach on a very large, fundamental scope. So it's very risky. People, by and large, would not volunteer to do that, but it may be thrust upon them. Because of maybe what competitors do, you have to embrace revolutionary change. Otherwise, you're going to be left so far behind, you'll never catch up. Reconstruction, at least we can say there, it's a fast change, but the damage is going to be limited. Reconstruction, at least we can focus on this small area that needs to be dealt with. Whereas with revolutionary change, we're looking at a whole business and trying to change everything at once on this very fast basis. At least reconstruction, we can concentrate on the risky activity.